The stale air in the pawn shop tasted of dust, old paper, and forgotten stories. It clung to the back of Sarah Jenkins's throat, a physical manifestation of the despair that had driven her here. Outside, the city's evening pulse was a distant, muffled beat. But inside, the only sound was the hum of a yellowed fluorescent light that cast long, predatory shadows over shelves of silent, orphaned objects, a tarnished saxophone, a stack of mismatched china, a row of power tools that had failed to build the dreams they were purchased for. Sarah's hand trembled as she placed the ring on the cool, scratched glass of the counter. It looked small and vulnerable there, stripped of its context and sentiment. Her grandmother-in-law-to-be's engagement ring. 100 years of love and promise, held within a delicate, intricate web of platinum and a modest, fiery diamond. It was the symbol of her future, the anchor of a stable, quiet life she and her fiancé, Mark, were painstakingly building, brick by brick, shift by grueling shift. The man behind the counter, Gus, had a face like a crumpled road map and eyes that had seen every shade of human desperation. He picked up the ring with the dispassionate air of a coroner, placing it under a jeweler's loop. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of her own making. Her nurse's scrubs felt like a costume, a cruel joke. Healers weren't supposed to be this broken. "It's a nice stone," Gus grunted, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Good clarity. Old setting, though, not very popular these days." He looked up, his gaze sliding over her worn sneakers, the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the faint tremor in her hands. He saw it all. He smelled the urgency. "I can give you 8,000 for it." The words hit her like a physical blow. 8,000. A fraction of its insured value, a pittance for its sentimental worth. But it was the exact number she needed. The number that had been seared into her brain for the last 3 hours. The cost of a life. The price of a first round of chemotherapy. "Fine," she heard herself say, the word, a ragged whisper torn from her soul. He didn't haggle. He didn't have to. He turned and began the slow, deliberate process of counting out 80 crisp $100 bills. Each snap of a bill was a nail in the coffin of the promise she had made to Mark, to his family, to herself. As he pushed the stack of cash towards her, her finger, now unnervingly bare, felt cold and alien. She scooped up the money, the paper feeling both impossibly heavy and shamefully light. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a thief, stealing from her own future. How had it come to this? How had a life built on compassion and care led her to this dingy, soul-crushing transaction? The answer wasn't an event, but a slow, creeping rot. The kind she saw every day. 12 hours earlier, her world had been radically different. It was the tail end of another punishing 12-hour shift at Northwood General Hospital. In the relative quiet of the break room, she'd been scrolling through photos of houses on her phone, houses with yards, with picket fences, with more trees than sirens. She'd twisted the ring on her finger, the diamond catching the flickering light. It was her mantra, just 2 more years. Mark had texted her then, a small beacon of warmth in the institutional chill. "Grandma's ring looking good on you tonight? Don't let any of your patients try to steal it. Love you." A tired smile had touched her lips. The ring was her connection to him, to normalcy, to a world beyond the sterile scent of antiseptic and the constant symphony of beeping machines. Then the call had come. A new patient in Bay 4. She'd pulled back the blue curtain, and her world had tilted on its axis. Elena Rodriguez sat on the edge of the gurney, looking pale and impossibly fragile. Beside her, her 7-year-old son, Leo, was diligently drawing superheroes in a worn notebook, his small brow furrowed in concentration. The official chart said dehydration and severe fatigue, but Sarah's training and intuition screamed something far worse. She saw the unique terror that only lives in the eyes of a parent facing their own mortality. "They say it's aggressive," Elena had said, her voice strained, her hands clutching Leo's little shoulder as if he were her anchor. "Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. But my oncologist, Dr. Evans, he says there's a new chemo regimen, Cladribine XT. He says it has a really high success rate." She'd tried for a brave smile. I felt so weak today. And Leo has a school play tomorrow. I can't miss it." The words hung in the air, a testament to a mother's simple, desperate wish. Not to conquer the world, but to see her son perform in a school play. Sarah had felt a fierce, protective surge. This was why she did this job. Not for the paycheck, not for the hospital, but for this. For Elena and Leo. Dr. Evans had put in the orders to admit Elena and start the chemo immediately. Aggressive cancer required an aggressive response. But then the unit clerk had flagged the order, her face apologetic. Her insurance is kicking it back. Sarah, ever the patient advocate, had taken the phone. The next 15 minutes were a masterclass in systemic cruelty. After an eternity on hold, listening to a tinny, looping piece of classical music designed to soothe but which only grated on her frayed nerves, a voice had finally answered. "This is Janice Gable with Unified Health Partners. How can I assist you?" The voice was maddeningly calm, a smooth, polished stone of indifference. Sarah had explained the situation with practiced patience, outlining the urgency, the diagnosis, Dr. Evans's professional recommendation. Janice had listened, or pretended to, the silence on the other end of the line punctuated only by the distant click of a keyboard. "One moment, please," Janice said. After another 2 minutes, she was back. "Yes, I have Mrs. Rodriguez's file here. I see the request for cladribine XT. A pause. Unfortunately, that particular drug is not on our approved formulary for this specific diagnosis. It's classified as experimental for this application." "Experimental?" Sarah's voice rose, incredulous. Her oncologist, a leading expert in his field, says it's her best and only chance. There are new studies, it's becoming the standard of care. "I understand your frustration, ma'am," Janice replied, the word ma'am a small, condescending dart. "However, policy is policy. We can offer coverage for the standard CHOP regimen, as per her plan's guidelines. The CHOP regimen has a 20% success rate for this subtype. Dr. Evans says that's not a risk worth taking. She needs the cladribine." "An appeal can be filed," Janice stated, her tone unchanging. "The clinical review board will assess the case. The process typically takes 6 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks. The words echoed in the cavernous space of Sarah's shock. For Elena's aggressive cancer, 6 to 8 weeks was a death sentence. It was a polite, bureaucratically sanctioned murder. "She doesn't have 6 to 8 weeks, Sarah had nearly shouted into the receiver. "Are you listening to me? She could die." "That is the standard procedure," Janice said. A final, soulless period at the end of a fatal sentence. The line went dead. Stunned, Sarah had begun her frantic, doomed tour of the hospital's chain of command. Her first stop was Brenda Malloy, the head nurse of the ER, a woman who had once been a passionate caregiver, but had long since calcified into a rigid enforcer of rules. "Sarah, you know the rules," Brenda said, her eyes full of a weary, resigned pity that was somehow worse than outright refusal. "We can't administer treatment without insurance pre-authorization or payment. We are not a charity. If we make an exception for her, where do we draw the line? We'd go bankrupt in a month." Next, the hospital social worker, a kind woman who gave Sarah a list of charities with impossibly long application processes and funds that had run dry months ago. Every door was a dead end, a polite but firm no. Her last resort was Mr. David Caldwell, the hospital administrator. His office was on the top floor, a world of polished wood and panoramic city views, utterly detached from the life and death struggles happening below. He was staring at a spreadsheet filled with numbers when she entered, and didn't look up for a full 30 seconds. Sarah, desperate, had laid out the entire situation, her voice trembling with a mixture of passion and fear. Caldwell had finally swiveled in his large leather chair, steepling his fingers. His expression wasn't one of sympathy, but of mild annoyance, as if she were a fly buzzing in his sterile sanctuary. "Nurse Jenkins," he'd said, his voice smooth and cold. "Your compassion is noted. However, this hospital is a business. A non-profit business, yes, but a business nonetheless. The cost of that first round of chemo is $7,800. Who, precisely, is going to pay for that? You?" He'd given a small, humorless smile. "If we start providing uncompensated care on this scale, I'll have to lay off staff. Maybe even nurses from your own department. Is that what you want, nurse? To have your compassion cost your colleagues their jobs?" The argument was so twisted, so perfectly designed to disarm and deflect, that it left her speechless. He had weaponized her empathy against her. She left his office not just defeated, but feeling sullied. Walking back to the ER in a daze, she had stopped outside Elena's bay. She'd heard the sound of quiet sobbing. It was Elena, speaking in soft, choked Spanish to Leo, trying to explain that she might have to stay in the hospital for a very long time, that she might miss his play, that he had to be a brave boy for his abuela. Then came the sound that shattered what was left of Sarah's composure, the small, heartbroken cry of a little boy. "But you promised, Mommy, you promised." That was it. That was the breaking point. The systemic failure, the corporate doublespeak, the bureaucratic cowardicite, all coalesced into the sound of that child's cry. Sarah looked down at her hand, at the ring Mark had slipped on her finger 6 months ago on a beach at sunset. The ring that represented her own secure, happy future. A future with children of her own. In that moment, she saw two paths diverge. One led to her picket fence and a life of quiet stability. The other led to a pawn shop. The choice was no choice at all. And so, here she was, standing on a grimy sidewalk, the city lights blurring through the tears in her eyes, her left hand feeling phantom pains for its missing weight. In her pocket, the $800 bills felt like contraband, a heavy, illicit secret. She didn't go home. She couldn't face Mark, not yet. She walked the few blocks back to Northwood General, the hospital's imposing silhouette a beacon of both her purpose and her pain. The 24-hour billing department was a sterile, lonely place at this hour. She walked to the window, the thick plexiglass a barrier between her and the clerk who looked up, bored. Sarah didn't speak. She slid the thick stack of cash into the tray. "This is for the first round of chemotherapy for patient Elena Rodriguez, room 4, she said, her voice hoarse. The clerk's eyes widened. A cash payment of this size was practically unheard of. He had to call a supervisor, who came and scrutinized Sarah, then the money, then the paperwork. Whispers were exchanged. Finally, with a sigh of bureaucratic resignation, the supervisor nodded. The clerk stamped a form with a heavy, satisfying thunk. A word appeared in green ink. Approved. It was the most beautiful word Sarah had ever seen. She practically ran to the ER. Dr. Evans was standing outside Elena's bay, looking at a chart with a bewildered expression. He looked up as Sarah approached. "Something strange just happened," he said, a smile playing on his lips. "Billing just called me. They said Mrs. Rodriguez is cleared to start treatment. The payment came through. I don't know who did it or how, but it's a miracle." Sarah's heart swelled. She pushed past him into the bay. Elena was sitting up, her face a mask of confusion. "Dr. Evans just told me," she began, her voice cracking. I don't understand." She looked at Sarah, her eyes searching. She saw the raw emotion on Sarah's face, the exhaustion, the fierce protective light. She didn't know the specifics, but she understood the essence. Tears of pure, unadulterated relief began to stream down her face. She reached out and grabbed Sarah's hand, her bare left hand. "Thank you," Elena sobbed, clinging to her. "Whoever you are, whatever you did, thank you." For one perfect, crystalline moment, the sacrifice, the lie, the gnawing pit in her stomach was all worth it. Seeing the hope flood back into Elena's eyes, knowing Leo would have his mother, this was the reason. This was the reward. The feeling didn't last. The high of her righteous act began to curdle into the cold dread of reality as she drove home through the pre-dawn grayness of the city. The apartment was quiet. Mark was asleep, but he stirred as she crept into the bedroom. He was a light sleeper, always subconsciously waiting for her to come home safe. He sat up, his voice thick with sleep. "Hey, you're late." He reached for her, pulling her into a warm embrace. It felt like coming home. Then his hand brushed against hers. He went still. He pulled back, turning on the bedside lamp, the soft light illuminating her bare finger. "Sarah? Honey, where's the ring?" Her heart plummeted. She had rehearsed a dozen lies on the drive home, and every one of them tasted like ash. Her mind raced, seizing on the most plausible, the most forgivable. "Oh my God," she breathed, injecting a note of manufactured panic into her voice. She looked at her hand as if seeing it for the first time. "It must have slipped off at work. With all the hand-washing and changing gloves, it must be in my locker, or in the laundry. Oh, Mark, I'm so sorry." He saw her distress, and his own concern for the ring was immediately overshadowed by his concern for her. Okay, honey, don't panic," he said, pulling her close again. "It's just a thing. It's insured, we'll find it, it was my grandmother's, you know?" "I know," she whispered into his chest, the lie a physical weight pressing down on her. "We'll find it, I promise." The lie was a new kind of poison, seeping into the foundation of their relationship. But as she arrived at the hospital later that morning for her next shift, she realized her personal turmoil was about to be eclipsed by a professional firestorm. She hadn't even made it to the locker room before Brenda Malloy intercepted her, her face a thundercloud. "Caldwell wants to see you." Now. The head nurse's tone wasn't just cold, it was accusatory. There was no "good morning," no "how are you?" Just the summons. The walk to the top floor felt like a walk to the gallows. The elevator's cheerful chime at each floor was a mocking counterpoint to the dread coiling in her stomach. Caldwell's office was just as she'd left it, a bubble of corporate serenity. But today, the man himself was anything but serene. He was standing by the window, his arms crossed, a sentry guarding his fortress of fiscal responsibility. "Close the door, Nurse Jenkins," he said without turning around. She did, the soft click of the latch sounding like a cell door locking. He turned, and his eyes were like chips of ice. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he began, his voice dangerously low. The large, anonymous cash payment had set off a cascade of red flags through the hospital's compliance and legal departments. He wasn't seeing a patient who was now receiving life-saving care. He was seeing a lawsuit waiting to happen. "You have completely, and I suspect knowingly, circumvented hospital policy," he continued, walking towards his desk but not sitting down, forcing her to remain standing like a schoolgirl awaiting punishment. "You have interfered in a patient's private financial arrangement with this institution. You have introduced a level of personal involvement that is not only profoundly unprofessional, it is a liability nightmare." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the polished desk. "What happens next, nurse? Does this patient now expect you to pay for her second round of chemo? And her third? What if she decides you coerced her? What if she sues you personally? What if, God forbid, she has an adverse reaction to the treatment and her family claims she was only able to receive it because our employee engaged in an unsanctioned, high-pressure financial transaction on hospital grounds? Do you see the Pandora's box you have opened?" Sarah stood frozen, speechless. He had twisted her act of compassion into a tapestry of malice and recklessness. He made her feel dirty, foolish. I just wanted to help her," she stammered. Helping her was the social worker's job. It was the charity's job. It was not your job to play God with this hospital's money and your own, he spat, his composure finally cracking. Then he pointed a finger at the door. "This conversation is not over. We're going downstairs." He wanted to make an example of her. He marched her back down to the ER, his fury a palpable force field around him. Brenda was waiting at the nurse's station, her expression a mixture of grim satisfaction and pity. In front of a dozen other nurses, doctors, and techs, the public shaming began. "Your actions were reckless and egotistical," Brenda said, her voice carrying across the busy floor. Staffers slowed their pace, pretending to check charts while their ears strained to catch every word of the unfolding drama. "You are not a social worker. You are not a financial advisor. You are a nurse. Your job is to follow doctor's orders and adhere to hospital protocol. You did neither. You put this entire department, this entire hospital, at risk to satisfy your own savior complex." Each word was a slap. Sarah's face burned with humiliation. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. And then, it got worse. As if on cue, 2 uniformed police officers walked into the ER. Their calm, authoritative presence immediately silenced the entire floor. They conferred quietly with Caldwell, who gestured towards Sarah. This was the peak of the nightmare. Caldwell had called the police on her. He was framing her act of charity as a potential crime. The officers approached her, their faces impassive. The taller one spoke, his voice polite but firm, which somehow made it all the more terrifying. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Miller. We've received a report of an irregular financial transaction on the premises. We just need to ask you a few questions." He was speaking to her as if she were a stranger, a suspect. Her colleagues stared, their faces a gallery of shock, pity, and scorn. She was being interrogated in the middle of her workplace for saving someone's life. "Ma'am, can you explain the source of the $8,000 you paid to the billing department last night?" The question hung in the air, thick with insinuation. "And ma'am," the other officer added, "are you aware that unduly influencing a patient's medical and financial decisions can be a serious violation of your professional code of conduct? And in some cases, the law?" She was a criminal. In their eyes, in Caldwell's eyes, in Brenda's eyes, she was a rogue agent, a liability, a criminal. The system, in all its majestic, heartless power, was closing in on her, and she had never felt so utterly, terrifyingly alone. But she wasn't alone. Unseen, from the doorway of the residence lounge, a young, idealistic doctor named Ben Ramirez watched the entire scene unfold. He was new enough to the system to still be shocked by its casual cruelty. He had seen Sarah with patience. He knew her heart. And watching Caldwell and Brenda feed her to the wolves, using police officers as tools of intimidation, filled him with a white-hot rage. He discreetly raised his phone, angling it just right. He hit record. The video was grainy, the audio muffled, but it captured the essence of the injustice. A humiliated nurse, flanked by cops, being interrogated for an act of kindness. Later that day, stewing in his anger, Dr. Ramirez sat in his small apartment and did something brave. He uploaded the video to a local community news blog, writing a short, anonymous, and passionate post. The title was pure, unadulterated outrage. My hospital just called the cops on a nurse for saving a patient's life. He hit publish and hoped for the best. Miles away, in a plush, top-floor conference room at that very same hospital, a man named Arthur Sterling was growing bored. The annual meeting of his foundation's board was droning on about interest rates and endowment projections. His foundation, the Eleanor Sterling Fund, was a major benefactor to Northwood General. He had established it 10 years ago after his beloved wife, Eleanor, had died of cancer in one of these very rooms. He knew the hospital's corridors and its hypocrisies intimately. He took a break, scrolling idly through local news on his tablet. And then he saw it. The headline jumped off the screen, a jolt to his system. He clicked the link. He read the furious, anonymous post. He watched the short, shaky video. He saw the familiar blue scrubs, the intimidating presence of the police, the stark institutional backdrop of the ER. He recognized the look of terrified injustice on the young nurse's face. And when the camera panned briefly, he recognized the man standing in the background, directing the show with a look of smug authority, David Caldwell. A cold, familiar anger settled in Sterling's chest. It was the same anger he had felt a decade ago, arguing with a younger, equally arrogant Caldwell over insurance-denied experimental treatments for Eleanor. Nothing had changed. The system was still devouring the compassionate and protecting the powerful. Arthur Sterling closed his tablet, his decision made. The board meeting was no longer his priority. He had a new project. He was a man who dealt in diamonds, objects of immense pressure and time, of value and brilliance. And he had just found a diamond in the rough. Now, it was time to change her setting. Sterling was not a man who acted impulsively. He moved with the quiet, deliberate precision that had built his empire. His first call was to his personal contact on the Northwood General Board of Directors, a man who owed him several favors. "Walter, it's Arthur Sterling. Tell me about David Caldwell. Is he still prioritizing the bottom line over patient outcomes?" The question was casual, but the underlying steel was unmistakable. Next, he needed to find the source. A little digital digging by his assistant led him to Dr. Ben Ramirez. Sterling didn't summon the young doctor. He found him in the hospital cafeteria, looking exhausted over a cup of coffee. He approached not as a billionaire tycoon, but as an old man deeply concerned about the hospital his wife had loved. "Dr. Ramirez," he said, his voice gentle. "I read your post. I believe you. Tell me everything." Hesitant at first, Ramirez saw the genuine, weary sadness in Sterling's eyes and poured out the whole story. Sarah's desperation, Elena's diagnosis, the insurance company's cold denial, Caldwell's vicious response. Finally, Sterling took a walk. He told his entourage he was touring the facilities his foundation supported, but he had only one destination. He found the oncology ward and stood for a long moment outside Elena Rodriguez's room. Through the glass, he saw her. She was asleep, an IV dripping life-saving medicine into her arm. In the chair beside her bed, her son Leo was fast asleep too, his head resting on the mattress, his small hand still clutching his mother's. In that tableau of fragile, fierce love, Sterling saw a ghost. He saw his Eleanor, her strength fading but her spirit bright. He saw the family they never had the chance to build. He saw the direct, tangible result of the nurse's sacrifice. It wasn't a liability issue or a breach of protocol. It was a mother who would get to see her son's school play. That was all he needed to know. The quiet investigation was over. It was time for the reckoning. The disciplinary hearing was held in a windowless conference room in the hospital's administrative basement, a place designed to make people feel small and powerless. Sarah sat at one side of a long, polished table. Across from her sat the triumvirate of her doom: Caldwell, looking smug and victorious; Brenda, looking uncomfortable but resolute; and a stone-faced woman from Human Resources, clutching a thick file with Sarah's name on it. Outside the door, Mark paced, his face a mask of anxiety. Sarah had finally told him everything the night before, the whole sordid story, the truth of the ring. His anger at her lie had been fleeting, instantly consumed by a wave of protective fury at what she had been forced to endure. He was here, and he was on her side, completely. It was a small comfort, but it was something. After a thorough review of the events of the last 48 hours, Caldwell began, savoring the moment. We have found multiple, serious violations of the Northwood General Employee Code of Conduct. Gross insubordination, reckless endangerment of the hospital's legal and financial standing, and a complete failure to adhere to professional boundaries. He slid a single piece of paper across the table towards her. This is a formal notice of your indefinite suspension, pending termination. You will turn in your badge and ID. Security will escort you from the premises. Sarah stared at the paper. This was it, the end of her career, the end of everything she had worked for. She felt a profound numbness, a hollowed-out emptiness where her fight used to be. She had sacrificed a piece of her future for someone else's, and her reward was professional execution. She looked at their faces, impassive, bureaucratic, final. She reached a trembling hand for the paper. The door opened. It didn't squeak or swing open. It was pushed with a quiet authority that commanded the attention of everyone in the room. Arthur Sterling stepped inside. He was dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored gray suit. He didn't look at Sarah. His gaze, sharp and cold as a diamond shard, was locked on David Caldwell. Caldwell's smug expression dissolved, replaced by a pasty, slack-jawed shock. "Mr. Sterling," he stammered, half rising from his chair. This is a private HR matter." Sterling ignored him, walking calmly to the table. He placed a thin leather folder down with a soft, definitive thud. "I've just come from the oncology ward," he said, his voice conversational but carrying an immense weight. "I had the pleasure of meeting a patient named Elena Rodriguez, a lovely woman with a very brave little boy." He let the name hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "I've also spoken with my personal bankers. I've arranged for a private trust to be established in Mrs. Rodriguez's name. It will cover the entirety of her medical care. Every test, every treatment, every follow-up, every last cent." He paused, letting the implications sink in. Then he turned his full attention to Caldwell. "Furthermore, I've just concluded a very productive telephone call with Walter Thorne, the chairman of your board. I informed him that the Eleanor Sterling Foundation will be pulling its annual 7-figure donation from Northwood General, effective immediately." The HR woman gasped. Brenda's face went white. "We will be redirecting that funding to establish a new, independent grant for underinsured patients in this city," Sterling continued, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. "To be administered by a third party. I cited a catastrophic failure of moral leadership at the administrative level of this hospital as the primary reason. Walter is calling an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. I imagine your performance, David, will be the central topic of discussion." Caldwell looked like he had been physically struck. His career, his reputation, his carefully constructed world of spreadsheets and policies was evaporating in front of him. Arthur Sterling straightened up, his work done. He finally turned to Sarah, and for the first time, his expression softened. The icy fire in his eyes was replaced by a look of profound respect. "Nurse Jenkins," he said, his voice now filled with a quiet warmth. "What you did was an extraordinary act of human decency in the face of institutional indifference. Do not let these people, or any system, ever make you believe otherwise." He gave a slight nod, turned, and walked out of the room, leaving a stunned, echoing silence in his wake. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been shattered and remade. The next morning, Sarah was at home, sitting with Mark at their small kitchen table. The hospital had called, her suspension was lifted. Mr. Caldwell had been placed on indefinite administrative leave. She should have felt victorious, but she just felt adrift, raw. A knock came at the door. It was a courier, holding a small, perfectly wrapped box from De Vere's, the city's most exclusive and legendary jeweler. It was addressed to her, with no sender's name. With trembling hands, she untied the silk ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was an engagement ring. It wasn't her original ring. It was something else entirely. A large, impossibly brilliant diamond, cut in a classic emerald shape, was flanked by smaller stones on a simple, elegant platinum band. It sparkled with a light that seemed to come from within, a captured star. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Beneath the ring was a small, thick card, the kind of heavy stock that felt important in your hand. On it, a few lines were written in a strong, clear, old-fashioned script. The value of an object is only what it can accomplish. Your ring saved a life. By that measure, it was the most valuable ring in the world. Please accept this as a replacement, and as a token of my deepest admiration for someone who understands what is truly valuable. The world needs more people like you. A friend. The tears she had held back for 2 days finally came, not tears of sorrow or humiliation, but of overwhelming cleansing relief. Mark came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her as she cried. He gently took the box, lifted the new ring, and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. It wasn't a replacement for his grandmother's history, but a testament to their new future, a future forged not just in love, but in fire, sacrifice, and a profound understanding of what truly mattered. The ripples of Sarah's act and Sterling's response spread far and wide. A few months later, Elena Rodriguez, her hair growing back in soft, dark curls, laughed as she pushed a vibrant, healthy Leo on a swing in a sun-drenched park. She was, against all odds, in remission. A local news channel ran a story on the firing of Northwood General's CEO, David Caldwell, following a unanimous vote by the board of directors. The report cut to a shot of a chastened-looking Brenda Malloy, patiently and kindly showing a new, young nurse how to properly comfort a frightened patient. At a press conference, Sarah Jenkins, looking confident and poised, stood beside a smiling Arthur Sterling to announce the launch of Eleanor's Angels, the new patient assistance fund. She was its head administrator. Her story had gone viral, and donations were pouring in from all over the country. The final scene was not of a press conference or a park. It was of Sarah. She was back in Scrubs, volunteering on a weekend at a community clinic. She was holding the hand of a scared, elderly man awaiting a diagnosis. The camera panned down to her hand, to the magnificent ring that sparkled on her finger. But the light from the diamond was no match for the steady, compassionate fire in her eyes. The ring was a symbol, but her grip strong, kind, and unwavering was the substance. She had been tested, broken, and remade. And she had learned that the greatest value lay not in what you owned, but in what you were willing to give away.